So, back with my weekly or bi-weekly, how often I can do it, news show, technology, gaming related, all things computer and binary related effectively, all condensed into a fast delivery mechanism that gives you information in a condensed form, hence the name database. So let's kick off with our very first one, and it's all around TVs and VRR, HDMI 2.1. I kind of condensed this into one little area. So it's that time of the generation, I think, where things are changing. You might be looking for a new screen. There's always that time you're looking for a new screen. And again, earlier this year, it says 2022, you saw a lot of new screens there from Sony, LG, Samsung, all the same names in terms of pushing that technology forward. One of the big ones is the QD-OLED. So this is probably the big transition of OLED. So to summarise this as an issue, OLED effectively has one big downfall compared to LED. And that's fundamentally the fact that it's darker. It doesn't show brights anywhere near as well. It's got much better contrast in terms of deeper blacks, closer to how CRT used to be, but fundamentally it still misses out, and therefore everything's a compromise. And because of this lack of brightness, it also means that it has worse colour gamut. So it's got a lower colour band. It can't replicate colours quite as well as LEDs. Obviously, that's around the brightness area. So the fix to this was Samsung, I think it was, who invented QD, so quantum dot technology. And that effectively allows images to be much brighter and a wider colour gamut. And what they've done now is obviously they've merged these two. So you've now got QD OLED. So it's almost the best of both worlds. So it gives you the wider colour gamut and brightness of a QD screen, a quantum dot screen, but the better contrast ratio and deeper blacks of OLED. Now it uses a TFT, a blue filter, so the OLED part is only blue only, and then it mixes with the QD dots, so there's the red and the green, and that gives you your RGB output. So it should be a perfect compromise in terms of getting the best of both. We'll have to see it in action. But fundamentally, the whole point of this discussion is around the fact that there's a lot of things happening at the moment in the TV space. So with PlayStation's having its VRR update, which you can check it out on IGN, it's a full in-depth look at what the VRR update does, how it works, where it doesn't work. But because it uses the HDMI standard, the 2.1 standard, which is a consortium of all the manufacturers in one forum to try and create standards, but just like HDR, just like HD, there's no one standard. It's a little bit all over the place, and that means that there's some TVs that it won't work on. I've got a Samsung TV or a Samsung monitor that I use on my desktop that's got FreeSync, both Ultimate Engine and Standard. Doesn't work on that on the PS5, won't work, but it works perfectly fine on my LG C1. Obviously check that your TV's got the latest updates before you rush out and buy another TV, because there might be a patch that's happened on some of the Samsung, LG, Sony TVs where VRR has been added. So do check that you've got the latest firmware on your TV before you decide you haven't got VRR. But what I'm trying to get to is there's a lot of things in flux. The standard, like I say, is all over the place, and there's still things happening in the TV space that I think over the next 2 or 3 years will trickle down to more affordable panels. This year, when we get these QD OLEDs, I'm sure they're going to be very expensive, but the image quality will be excellent on them. How good they are at presenting retro technology and retro games is, vital to a lot of people. Me, I'd rather play on CRTs. I never think we'll ever get to LCDs getting anywhere near what CRTs can deliver, because they generally look crap, not just because of the aspect ratio and the stretching of pixels and all that around the screen, but also just the way they ruined the pixel quality, the merged pixels of phosphor dots that all the art was designed for back then. It's all ruined, and as you can see examples here, it just looked horrible with Vigilante on the Master System. It's a good example of where it goes wrong. And the contrast ratio and stuff is something that I think also drops out. So I would say wait. Do not rush out and buy a TV, certainly this year, or at least the end of the year. I would say next year predominantly. There's going to be 7 or 8 years of the PS5 and Series X. There's going to be areas in which the PS5 will probably update it, just as you remember the PS4. The way Sony designed the PS4 was they have a man in the middle. They have a chip between the GPU output and the HDMI port on the back of the console. The Xbox didn't have that. They went for a standard HDMI port. That's why they couldn't backport HDR into the console, whereas Sony could with the PS4. And fundamentally, VRR is software driven, so your limit is always going to be the screen you buy. So the screen will dictate how fast or slow the actual GPU can tell it to update. So if you've got a 144Hz screen, you'll have a bigger window than if you've got a 120Hz screen. So that means that Sony will have a lot of area to play with, and the HDMI standards, like I say, are all over the place, including the bandwidth that they use, 48 gigabits for 4K and 120, but there's all the compression elements, and both Series X and PS5 don't use 48 gigabits. Whether they can, I don't know, but at the moment they certainly don't use it. So there's a lot of areas that will change in the next couple of years because of the fact that we're in this flux stage. Just remember back to HDR when that started out. And HD, like I say, remember HD when it was all 720, 1080i and all that kind of confusion that went on for many years before it all settled down into 1080p, and then whoa, 4K UHD popped up. So I would say wait until we see screens and updates that have a broader level of support for the PS5. The Series X is pretty good, to be fair. It uses FreeSync and it uses HDMI 2.1, so you've got a situation there where it currently supports more screens. I'm sure Sony will release updates to the firmware and allow it to support more screens over the next few months, but at the moment there is a limit, so do check before you rush out and buy a new TV that your TV can support it with an update. And if not, I would say wait, don't rush out and buy a TV just for VR at this point. I don't think it's worth it. I've covered this here, and I will be covering a wider discussion around newer TVs and technologies and all that kind of stuff, just like I did many years ago with my house set with a TV and also HDR stuff. So do stay tuned for that on the channel at some point. That's it. TVs, they're always on the go. So next on the list is new GPUs. Yes, 2022 is going to see a brand spanking new release of GPUs from AMD and Nvidia. So there's a lot of information that's come from Tom over at Moore's Law is Dead. He's got a lot of information from manufacturers there. There's Paul at Red Gaming Tech and many others that are showing off some of the leaks that are coming out, and certainly work in progress on terms of the new GPUs, and even Intel. They are very late to the party. Obviously some definite problems there in terms of their GPU launch, but I'm looking forward to them actually landing with that. My suspicion there is driver issues. They're definitely working on solutions with individual partners like Kojima Productions here with Death Stranding, but the GPU's not out and they're still only showing off the lower end, which is easier to get out. So there's definitely areas there, and I desperately want them to get into the fight because more competition is better for the consumer. So that's definitely something we should see. Judging by the financial forecasts, where everything is, it's going to be end of the year. So Q4 is where the estimation of the new GPUs are going to come out, and obviously Nvidia and AMD are going to be head to head. And obviously AMD have made a huge comeback. So I remember when they were competitive, when they snapped up ATI, and back then I think it was the 7970, the HD 7970, around that time when they were really the flagship GPU. And since then Nvidia has really held the market. But RDNA 3 is going to be a continuation of what they've been doing throughout their entire rebirth in terms of just maximizing potential, starting slowly and building. Zen 1 was a great step forward for them, but it wasn't taking away the hot spot from Intel. And then they did it with Zen 2, Zen 3, and Zen 4 is going to be even better. We've already seen that with the 5800 XD, which I discussed last week. So that's stacked design in terms of the cache on a 3D stack. That's what the GPUs are going to be effectively, and all signs point to that because they're trying to converge their technology with that Infinity Fabric. So rumors abound that you're going to get, I think, 512 megabytes of Infinity cache, which is a huge amount of Infinity cache in terms of maximizing the amount of cache available to the GPU to do work, to stop it from stalling, to reduce latency, and obviously improve bandwidth. It means you don't have to spend loads and loads of money and power having all that going out to main system RAM. So 512 megs of Infinity cache is a huge amount. And RDNA 3 I think will be a very impressive technology. In terms of rasterization, they've caught up with Nvidia. I think everyone can agree. They trade blows really dependent on the game engine and how the driver support is and all that kind of stuff. So they're at the same level now. But when it comes to ray tracing, obviously they're not as efficient and as good as the Nvidia RTX cards are, and that will be something that they really need to step up. And again, that's one thing that they've absolutely improved. They've moved away from talking about compute units and CUs now, so it's all work groups, which is basically the wavefronts in terms of how they generate workloads. And I don't know the ins and outs because obviously it's all rumour, so I'm not going to get into all the rumour speculation. But right now, there's not a huge delta. I don't care what anyone says. There's not a huge difference between the very best a PC can offer and the very best you can get on Series X and PS5. There just isn't. You can get higher resolutions, absolutely. You can get higher frame rates, absolutely. But we're not really into next generation titles yet. So all of that's going to change. We saw a taste of that with the Matrix, and I've covered that already in terms of how that's going to affect engines. But new architecture is going to be needed, or at least it's something that's exciting to see in the PC space. So we're now going to get a brand new board from AMD, so an AM5 board. And that really should be used to help the gap that's going to appear, and it's already starting to see it in terms of how the console is constructed. those split pulls around the PCI Express, all of that fundamental construction around the I/O bus on the PS5 is going to make a difference. Now, contrary to what I've just said, there is one area, obviously, in PC that they have got that is a differentiator, and that's their ray tracing. Like I say, they really can push forward on that, and this is where AMD need to catch up with NVIDIA, and NVIDIA need to push really hard. There's some great titles on the PC space, such as you can see here with Doom, with ray tracing, Quake 2 path tracing, there's Minecraft path tracing, which is not even available on Xbox. So there's a lot of areas here that they really could and should start utilising heavily, and I really want to see that happen on the AMD space and with Intel as well, with support ray tracing, and again all those reconstruction techniques. And a lot of these titles, such as Doom here, could appear on the consoles. It would be no problem at all using things like FSR and super resolution, FSR 2.0 specifically, getting those lower bases up but reconstructing them back with using AI reconstruction, checkerboarding techniques, FSR techniques, DLSS techniques. All of those things means that everyone's going to really utilize cleverer pixels rather than more pixels. But if you are in the market for a new PC and you are looking at GPUs, prices are dropping, so not great. MSRP still nowhere near reality, but we are seeing slightly lower prices. I'll be interested to see what the prices come out at when these new machines launch at the end of the year, what that AMD board is going to be, the AM5 board, with the improvements to DDR5, PCI Express 5.0, how the infrastructure works better with the SSD. So that's kind of the areas I want to see. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting year. It's taken me back to the older days in some ways of PC space, where PC struggled, really to run stuff and push ahead of the consoles. That's where we are now, and that's going to happen in current generation builds. You're going to see a lot smaller gaps than probably a lot of PC people are used to, like I said before, because of the CPU and all those elements around improving the quality of the consoles, the lower level APIs, the construction that they've got in terms of developing on those. That's why we're going to see new hardware. So it'll be exciting to see. It's not quite the old days with 3 players in there. It's not quite the 3DFX. ATI, NVIDIA, Matrox, S3 Verge. They're all not, all these different GPU vendors coming into the market where you had to pick whichever one you want, PowerVR. So all of those things I think is exciting to see. So I really hope that this is going to reinvigorate the PC space, and we see some reinvigoration in terms of utilising ray tracing and all those elements that PC can push forward on. Like I say though, if you are in the market, wait it out until these launch, but be prepared to dig deep, because it's not going to be cheap replacing your entire system, including PSU if you've not updated one recently, because these are going to be very powerful, 500 watts. So a lot of GPU power there in terms of sucking it all up, and then you've got the CPU as well and everything else, the RAM, DDR5. So you are going to need to replace everything, probably even your tower. So just be prepared for digging in deep. But I'm looking forward to it. It should be exciting, and new hardware is always a good time, and it should be an improvement by having more players battling it out. And yet again, it seems like history is repeating itself. This time we're going back to my early days, my early childhood of, well, mid-childhood, of Commodore 64, Amiga, discs, demos, coded away with magazines, PlayStation and PSplus, the game trial. So it's been confirmed now that from developer side, it's been embedded and all taken care of by Sony themselves. There's no additional work for the developers. But now you'll be able to get game trials, effectively limited edition, which happened years ago. PlayStation used to do this anyway, and like I say, demos and free trials of games has long since been a standard form. It's only in the last 20 years or so it's not been a thing, but I'm all for it. The fact that it's behind a subscription service, okay, makes perfect sense. It's another reason to get that in there in terms of signing up to it with the other stuff. People's views on it, I'm not a big fan of DRM. In fact, just look at what stuff happened on Xbox this week. That's the reason why DRM and online solutions are terrible, because you get problems. I myself wasn't actually that badly affected. I only had a couple of issues with it, but yeah, fundamentally DRM is a pain in the bum, and this is what happens when you put everything on an online server. If it goes down, if you have problems, you lose it. So the fact that PSplus is going to put these game trials on there, I'm not a big fan of online solutions, but at least there's an incentive here to say to yourself, okay, I can play all these big games for free, and if I don't like it, I don't have to buy it. So that's a great boost, I think, for players in terms of PlayStation environment and getting trials on games. And obviously there might even be a revenue stream there for the actual developers themselves, because I think one of the reasons behind all this, and this is the problem with the Netflix and the Game Pass and all that kind of stuff, I don't care what anyone says, it's full of so many games you can't play them all, and stuff just gets lost in the crowd. It just totally gets lost. So at least with this solution, I'm sure there's a level of benefit to say, if you play the trial, then the developer gets a cut of your subscription rate. So there is at least a revenue stream there that they get some money from it being on the service. And if you buy it, then great, you've bought the game. And that will happen, you'll get things converted into sales all the time. But it's also a dangerous situation, I think, for some developers. Personally, for a consumer, I think it's pro-consumer all day, every day, because you get to try something without paying for it. You're trying for free, which is perfect. But it means that you have got the risk that word of mouth can spread, and people can say, look at this game, you'll get online streams of games and all this kind of stuff from these trials. And it obviously has worked out for EA. EA have done it for a while with the 10-hour trials, but they've got a very limited amount of releases, so it doesn't impact them so heavily, and there's that subscription that's going directly to them. So it'll be interesting to see how well received this is and what it does to the market. But for me, I'm all for change and more for things coming in, and again, I always stress, as long as it's an option, I will buy it all day, every day, physical. That's the way I am. That's, I'm a lot old school gamer, so that's what I'll do. But having the choice to do this makes perfect sense, and I think that's great. And I think that's what Sony are doing. They're giving people choice, so it's perfect that you have two options here. It will be very interesting to see how it shakes out, though, when and if certain bigger publishers decide to not do it. I'll be interested to see if everyone does it, including the likes of Activision and companies like that, Ubisoft. It'll be interesting to see if they all fall into line with Sony's plan. But yeah, Game Trolls, what do you think? So now we move into the Q&A. So remember, this is the option for patrons. So if you want to be a patron and join and support the channel, help it grow and improve, then you can join with the link down below. Pay as much as you can afford in terms of the options that are there, and I do give exclusive content, early content, and some good stuff coming up that I've been working on for the past few weeks that I'm getting very close to finishing. But the additional benefit is you get to ask me a question about absolutely anything at all. So it means that we can have discussions around things that you want to discuss, and that's what's happened here. So without further ado, the first question for this week is a question from David. His question is, there's a debate that the Steam Deck can run Flight Simulator, so could the last-gen consoles. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the matter. It's a silly exercise, but I find it interesting nonetheless. What do you think? Cheers. I think it could run, absolutely, yes. If it runs on the Steam Deck, it will absolutely run on a last-generation machine. Probably not very well. The biggest problem that's going to limit that is it's very CPU-heavy, and it might never reach 30 FPS. That would be the problem. So it would need significant cutbacks. It would need simplifying in terms of the simulation and the mapping data that's going on, which I assume that's one of the big reasons why it hammers the CPU so much. So yeah, nothing's impossible. I think that's the thing. We've seen that, look at the retro scene for games that are coming out that you wouldn't have thought possible back then are now running on those machines. So yeah, it would absolutely run on the PS4. Probably the Xbox would struggle, maybe. There'd be a lot of work there to make that run, specifically around the SRAM, the construction. There's a lot of effort. I'm sure it could. It would just be heavily pared back, I think. Visually and simulation-wise, it would be cut back. I haven't seen it on the Steam Deck. I haven't seen what it runs like. I don't even have my Steam Deck. I'm still waiting for my my one to be delivered. I missed it by a day when everyone else did, and that's cost me like 6 months of everyone else's deliveries or whatever it is. So I'm desperate to get my hands on a Steam Deck and actually start testing it for myself, because I think it's a great piece of kit. But yeah, I think Flight Simulator would run. I just don't think it would run very well. And I don't think anyone would really buy it and love it. I think they'd just think, oh, do you know what? I'll leave it then. That's not worth it. But yeah, it's a good question. And I think it kind of paints the picture, which is, it's the same thing as always. There's always a way to run things. It's depending on what you cut and whether you make the game with a spec in mind. Okay. Next question. So the next question... Oh, okay. Yes, okay. So the next question is a good one. So Jorge Diaz Barrente, I hope I pronounced that right. Hi, Michael. Now that you're making this series, I asked you in the past if you had any sort of connections or prior relationships to Digital Foundry. You told me that maybe someday you'd talk about that. So that's my question for a database. Yes. So... probably a lot of people don't know. So I started this technique of doing video analysis and everything else way before Digital Foundry did. So I started doing it in 2013, tail end 2013, 2014. And I got some good attention, some developers, and lots of people saw some of the videos that I did, like Watch Dogs and Uncharted and The Order 1886, The Witcher 3, Drive Club, and many others were popular at the time. And Richard Ledbetter contacted me at tail end of 2014, 2015. So they still weren't making videos like that. They were still just putting up their comparison stuff to go, the frame rate stuff to go with their online articles on Eurogamer. So I met him. I went down to London and met him, and we had a chat. And at the time, he said he's going to replace the guy, one of the guys, with me. That was his plan. So it was the American guy, which I now know was John Lineman. He was thinking about replacing him or the other guy, which he got rid of in the end. I think he did replace him. And the plan was that I was going to come and do videos for them and work on them. He asked me some questions about how did you do tearing and stuff. And it was all a bit kind of weird and wonderful, and I gave him some ideas and suggestions, and he was, your videos are great, we want to do the same thing, and he's done that. They copied everything that I did, so that's just the nature of the beast. That's, I can't change that. That's what people do. So there's no argument there. You just got to look back at all my old videos and see that 2 years before they did anything like that, I was doing all the same things. You can see the similarities. There's a lot of things there. But it petered out. He didn't respond, and he asked some information about stuff, and I wasn't too keen to give it up just meeting him. And it turned out I was the right thing to do, because he stopped contacting me and just kind of went back to doing his own thing. And then obviously, I think it was 2016, tail end of 2015, 2016, they started doing talk videos and working their way up. So yeah, that's basically the history of Digital Foundry. So they kind of saw me, and what they do now, what they're very popular for now, because they've got a lot. I help them. Their method that they do now, they got that from me. Richard Ledbetter didn't have the idea. He reached out to me and wanted to take more ideas from me. So that is fundamentally the history, in quotes. And it's also a good point to bring up one of the things that I see a lot, which is like, I think people say I'm like Digital Foundry, I'm one-man Digital Foundry. I appreciate it, but I don't kind of like that comparison, because I'm not. More the other way around. They're a multi-version of me because I was here first. And secondly, I just don't think that it's good to compare. We need competition in the market. I will say this all the time. So the fact that they're there, I'm doing my stuff, there's other people that do their stuff, like VG Tech, he does good frame rate analysis. So the fact that you've got more people is normal. There's not enough people in the technology space doing this kind of work. I mean, you've got Hardware Unboxed in the PC space, you've got Red Gaming Tech, you've got Linus Tech Tips, which is again very mainstream, and then you've got Games Nexus, which I think is very, very good. There's other ones. So you need a collection of people doing lots of analysis, not just one person doing it or one company doing it. There shouldn't be a monopoly on it. So I think it's great that they're in the same space, and they kind of followed my lead and came in and did this, and they've popularised it because they've got much bigger clout, bigger time. They're all full time on it, so I'm not. It's just a part-time gig for me. So yeah, that's the history with Digital Foundry. Probably not the best answer, but it's an answer nonetheless. Okay, the next question is, with the amount of money that gaming can produce, Unicron again, thank you Unicron, sorry. With the amount of money that gaming can produce, do you think that there is enough money and space for a fourth platform to flourish? It could be that we already have it with VR. Well, VR, yeah, absolutely. VR is a separate platform, and I think it's one that everyone knows I love. I'm well into my VR, PC and console, so I've been using it for years and years and years. And I think that it's a great area to differentiate from other areas. And it takes me back to gaming of old, because, I don't live gaming. I do a lot of other things, and that's how it used to be as a kid. Gaming was a hobby, but you did other things. And I think it's bad to live 24/7 on a game and just do nothing but that. And I think VR works naturally to get me back to that kind of that mindset, which is I think normal, where you go and have a couple of hours on a VR game, because that's really how long you can stay in it, and then leave. Same as arcades. It was a go in, throw a few 10 pences in there, play for an hour or two, and then come out and go home. That's what I think is good, having that balance there, and VR works for that. In terms of a fourth platform, yes, I'm still surprised that Apple haven't put their foot in the door. There's so much money in the gaming space. I'm amazed that we haven't seen more and more companies jump in. I think Google tried it, but again, that just doesn't work, because they were trying to do something that was online streaming, and there's already other solutions that have got bigger clout, and I think that's just going to fall by the wayside. We had the OU, whatever it was called. So there's lots of other options, but I'm still surprised that nobody else has put full feet into the market. I do still say, and I said this years ago, I do think that Xbox in the end will go to IP branding. So I think you'll get an Xbox made by many different companies that would be different specs like a PC, and it'll be an Xbox brand, and it'll come with Game Pass and all that. It'll be a centralized box that has loads of options in there as a publisher, and that's what they'll go to. And I still think you'll see things like MSI or even, you know, Gigabyte or anyone else making Xbox consoles. It could be a profitable solution for them, and I do think that that's a viable future for Xbox. I do think it's a viable future for a lot of companies that could go down that route and get their foot in the door. The problem is that you've got to compete against what's out there, and I think that for the subscription model, Xbox are going Game Pass all in. That's completely their thing now. They're just, however you get on Game Pass, be it on your phone or on your PC or whatever, then just go subscribe, stay subscribed and keep doing it. And there's a whole thing around that model which I mentioned before, which is all around hype. And then Sony are really the kind of brand in gaming that is known for it. Their quality levels are just sky high. They're always consistent with what they produce. They push the envelope all the time. You know, technology is driven by Sony, not by Xbox anymore, unfortunately. I hate to say that, but it just isn't anything. I mean, where have Xbox been this year? They've not brought anything out. But Sony are also having to, you know, create USPs and go in different avenues so that they got all these options covered. So they were streaming way before anyone else was doing it. They snapped up what was it called? Dave Perry's old company, Gaikai. So that became PS Now, and that was 2010. And they were streaming before then. So, you know, that's... Sony have always been pushing the envelope in terms of trying new avenues and broadening the market, but there's definitely area for other people to come into the place. Nintendo have always been Nintendo in their own little space. Like I say, Xbox have kind of lost focus, I think, in terms of what they're doing, or their focus is now different. It's all around that subscription model. So absolutely there's space for other players in this market. What that would be and who that would be, again, I still am amazed that Apple haven't done it, or somebody else hasn't stepped into it. Who knows, maybe Elon Musk will do it. He's taken over everywhere else. Maybe Elon Musk will be the next one to jump into the gaming space and redefine it as he flies us all to the moon. That's it. I think we'll draw it to a close there, because I think half an hour is enough for me rambling on. Hopefully you did enjoy this. There wasn't as much information and news this week, but I tried to give you as much as I can to make this at least meaningful. And it was hopefully some insight into technology, me, history, and all things gaming related. If you do like this or anything else that I do, then obviously, if you can, join Patron and help me out there. That really helps. But if not, then please subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, comment down below, thumbs up, or if you did, and thumbs down if you didn't. And I'll see you very soon on the next one. And also over on RGN.